Mary Tudor has gone down in history as a maniac who burned hundreds of people, but recent evidence reveals a more complicated story. Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary as she became known, executed hundreds of Protestants during her short reign. But there's more to Queen Mary's life than her ruthless reputation. From her tragic childhood to her complicated romantic life, this is the untold story of England's very first queen. Mary's mother, Queen Catherine of Aragon, had an absolutely brutal time when it came to childbirth. Over the course of 9 pregnancies, she suffered multiple miscarriages, had stillborn births, or watched her babies perish before their first birthdays. When Mary was born, Catherine was happy to finally have a child survive. But what about her husband, King Henry VIII? Not so much. He desperately needed a male heir, and when he heard that Mary had been born, his response was heartless. He consoled Catherine by saying that since this one was a girl, it meant a better chance for a boy the next time. As Mary's dear old dad sat around waiting for a son, he figured he might as well use his daughter as a way to forge alliances. At just 2 years old, he pledged Mary to the Prince of France. Then, when she was 6, Mary was set to tie the knot with her own cousin. By the time she was a teenager, Mary already had been engaged to 3 different men. Before long, King Henry fell in love with Lady Anne Boleyn, and he would move heaven and earth to be with her. This meant trouble for Queen Catherine and her daughter Mary. At the time, divorce was a big no-no, but Henry just couldn't wait to shack up with his new mistress. While he pressured the church to grant him divorce, Henry banished Catherine to a faraway fort. In 1533, Mary's parents officially broke up. A mere 5 days after getting the church to let him dump Catherine, Henry walked down the aisle with his side piece, Anne Boleyn. With his new bride by his side, Henry then twisted the knife. He declared Mary illegitimate and demoted her from a princess to a lady. Mary was no longer in line for the throne. Instead, that honor went to her dad's new favorite daughter, little Princess Elizabeth, Henry's baby with Anne Boleyn. To say that Mary was ticked would be a huge understatement. She was furious. Mary refused to treat her new stepmom and stepsister like they were her superiors. In retaliation, Henry made his daughter's life a waking nightmare. King Henry couldn't tolerate Mary's cold treatment of his new wife and baby, so he did what any deranged father would do. First, he tried to manipulate Mary, then he attempted to bribe her. Even under so much pressure, Mary stood up to the king and refused to bend to his will. Henry took away her jewels, disbanded her household, and wouldn't even let her go on walks. There was, however, one bright spot in Mary's misery: her mother. The two secretly corresponded through letters, but even this consolation wouldn't last for long. In 1536, Mary's beloved mother, Catherine of Aragon, breathed her last breath. With this loss, Mary became absolutely inconsolable. The princess shut herself away in a remote estate so that she could grieve in private. Soon it turned out that Anne Boleyn also couldn't give Henry a male heir, so he beheaded his second wife and declared baby Elizabeth illegitimate. Luckily for Mary, this meant that she was back in the royal game. Mary's dad didn't seem to believe in taking a breath between relationships, so soon enough, he tied the knot with his third wife, Jane Seymour. Thankfully, she and Mary got along much better than Henry's last bride. Jane and Mary were fast friends, and Jane even made Mary the godmother of her newborn son. Sadly, disaster was about to strike again. Jane's labor had been utterly horrible, and after clinging to life for 2 weeks, she died. As a sign of Mary's devotion to her stepmother, she held the role of chief mourner at the funeral. Mary's relationship with her father was finally on the mend. But there was still one problem. Mary refused to say that her parents' relationship was invalid or admit that Henry was right to leave her mother. Furious at Mary's defiance, Henry locked his daughter in a room and kept her there until she finally gave in. Mary's final stepmother, Catherine Parr, turned out to be her favorite. She became very close with Catherine, bonding with her new stepmom over cards and chess matches. Finally, Mary's home life was stable, but the peace wouldn't last long. In 1547, her father, the infamous King Henry VIII, passed on. With his loss, Mary, along with the rest of England, entered an era of profound uncertainty. With Henry out of the picture, his 9-year-old son, King Edward VI, took the throne. Edward's rule was a bloody mess, full of riots, rebellions, and revolts both in and out of court. At home, Edward and Mary feuded constantly over their different beliefs. She was a Catholic and he was a Protestant, but both of them refused to back down. Another princess would have given in and converted to the court's religion, but not Mary. She insisted on attending Catholic services in her own private chapel, and then made it her personal mini-mission to get other courtiers to see the light. The young king watched furious as his half-sister defied him, and then he lashed out. Edward ordered Mary to stop her masses and even banned her from holding private services. The siblings' feud hit fever pitch when Mary got into a shouting match with the king in front of the entire court. It was a huge scandal. At this point, Mary was at her wit's end. She'd literally rather run away than give in and become a Protestant, and so she did just that. Courtiers caught the princess as she tried to escape from the castle, which now felt more like a prison cell. After forcing Mary back into her chambers, it looked like the feud between the princess and the king was finally at its breaking point, and then suddenly, everything changed. On October 6, 1553, after feeling ill for a few months, King Edward VI died. He was just 15 years old when he breathed his last breath. With Edward's demise, England plunged into another period of uncertainty. Even though Mary was the rightful heir, a complex plot kept her from taking power. A duke saw Edward's demise as a way to put his relative, Lady Jane Grey, on the throne. As Edward declined, he was convinced to change his successor to Lady Grey and keep Mary on the sidelines. This was, to put it lightly, a very bad idea. Lady Jane infamously held the title of Queen for a mere 9 days. She lost the crown on July 12, 1553, when Mary gathered her forces and stormed the castle to seize power from her rival. Mary defeated Lady Jane Grey and locked her up in the infamous Tower of London. Then she, along with her half-sister Elizabeth, took a victory lap. It was a rare moment of joy in Mary's incredibly turbulent and difficult life. Soon, another problem arose for Mary. Now that she was queen, she needed to tie the knot, and fast. So she decided on Philip II of Spain, but before she said I do, she had one iconic request. She needed to see a portrait of Philip so that she could decide if he was attractive enough for England's first female ruler. Apparently, Philip's painting did the trick. At the age of 37, Mary finally walked down the aisle with her mail-order bow. Mary was very happy with her choice, but what about the people of England? Not so much. When Mary and Philip tied the knot, rebellions broke out across the kingdom. Despite the protests, the queen came to love her husband dearly. She was so besotted that she often felt hurt when he went away to look after his other territories. Philip, for his part, did not seem to feel the love. He didn't gush the way Mary did, and often didn't stay in England for long periods of time. Why didn't Philip love Mary the way she loved him? One reason might have been his wounded ego. When Mary and Philip walked down the aisle, the people of England felt nervous that if the staunchly Catholic princess married a Catholic Spanish prince, the people of England might be forced to convert back to Catholicism. Obviously, Mary wanted to do exactly this, but she also wanted to hold on to her power. So to reassure her people, she made Philip sign a humiliating agreement. Queen Mary's Marriage Act, which basically said that even though Philip could call himself the King of England, he had to get Mary's permission to do anything. The two shared co-authority, but the terms were pretty clear. This was Mary's house, and Philip was not the one in charge. Another reason for Philip's cool feelings towards Mary: the royal couple didn't exactly have chemistry. She was also 10 years older than Philip, and apparently Philip just didn't find Mary very attractive, and he did not hide his feelings from her too well. Despite their lack of chemistry, in the summer of 1554, the English court braced for news of Mary's first child. Mary had started to show signs of a pregnancy months earlier, and everyone was getting ready to welcome the next heir to the throne. While Mary was busy dealing with a brutal pregnancy, Philip was getting ready to deal his wife a cold-hearted betrayal. Determined to hold on to power, Philip started romancing his wife's younger sister, Princess Elizabeth. Should Mary kick the bucket giving birth to their child, Elizabeth would take the crown, and if Philip married her, he'd get to stay king. In the beginning of May, Mary enclosed herself in a private room and waited to give birth. When the baby didn't arrive by the end of the month, her advisors explained the delay by saying they must have calculated the wrong due date. But as the weeks passed and no baby appeared, they started to think that something much worse was at play. With each passing day, Mary became more and more devastated. She refused to speak and would lie in bed, seemingly numb. On other days, she would wail on the floor and curl into the fetal position. By August, Mary had been waiting to give birth for 4 torturous months. When her baby bump began to mysteriously decrease, she finally gave up. It turned out that even though Mary had morning sickness and a protruding belly, the queen had actually never been pregnant at all. Perhaps for psychological reasons, Mary had a rare case of false pregnancy. After it became clear that Mary was not with child, the rumor mill went into overdrive. Across England, stories sprung up to explain Mary's unusual pregnancy. Some claimed she had a miscarriage and was trying to keep her loss a secret. Others believed that the pregnancy was always fake and that Mary was going to sneak in a baby to pose as her own. Saddest of all, some people thought Mary was terribly ill and in denial about it. In fact, Mary was so certain that she was pregnant that she had letters drafted announcing the birth of her heir, the next ruler of England. Sadly, the letters would never be needed. Mary became convinced that her false pregnancy was a punishment from God. Clearly, she had displeased the Lord by tolerating Protestants in her country. As a way to prove herself a good Catholic, Mary decided the time had come to take a hard line on religion in England. She locked up prominent Protestants in her realm, but soon, even that wasn't enough to satisfy her need for vengeance. In 1554, Mary instituted the controversial Heresy Acts and officially began the darkest part of her legacy. These acts allowed Mary to punish Protestants for their religion, often by burning them at the stake. England was about to become a terrifying place. As part of her plan to cleanse England, she brought back old laws to make heresy a treasonable offense. Mary couldn't execute someone for not being Catholic, but if heresy counted as treason, she could slash her way through the kingdom. With the old laws back in action, she began her brutal mission. In just 3 years, Mary's actions earned her the now infamous nickname Bloody Mary and transformed her legacy. During this time, Queen Mary burned an astonishing 280 people at the stake. In comparison, her violent father burned 81 people. When it comes to bloodshed, it's hard to outdo King Henry VIII, but clearly, Mary managed. As a young girl, Mary had watched her father use Protestantism to cruelly divorce and then lock up her beloved mother, Queen Catherine of Aragon. Decades later, it was clear that she hadn't forgiven her father. Historians believe that Henry's actions fueled his daughter's staunch devotion to Catholicism and her red-hot hatred for Protestants. As Mary set fire to her kingdom's heretics, her actions, justifiably, caused her subjects to quake in their boots. Mary's popularity plummeted with each execution, and then she made another huge fumble. England had a single stronghold left in France, and it was Mary who lost it forever. This failure, combined with her resentful subjects, left Mary in despair. Unfortunately, things were not about to change for the better. In 1557, after Philip had been in continental Europe fighting various battles, he finally made it back to England and performed his royal duty. Soon after, Mary believed she was pregnant. Philip, on the other hand, felt certain that his wife was imagining things again. Sadly, he was right. This time around, Mary wasn't undergoing a phantom pregnancy. Instead, the reason for her mysterious symptoms was much worse. Mary was now in her 40s, and the fact that her periods stopped didn't mean she was with child. It meant she was undergoing menopause. At that moment, Mary admitted that she would never have a baby. Heartbroken, she did what she had to do. Mary had never much liked her half-sister Elizabeth. Now she was forced to make Elizabeth her heir. It was a tough pill to swallow. Philip convinced his wife that this was the right decision, presumably without mentioning that he was planning to marry Elizabeth after Mary died. Beginning in May 1558, Mary began to feel unwell. She complained of pains in her abdomen and over the next few months declined further and further. On November 17, 1558, the Queen died. To this day, the reasons for her demise are not fully clear. Some accounts suggest that the Queen succumbed to a severe case of influenza. Modern scholars think she may have had uterine cancer or ovarian cysts, and that her false pregnancies were caused by a malignant tumor. Either way, we know that Mary's demise was painful. And somehow that's not even the worst part. Where was Mary's beloved husband Philip during this time? By her bedside? Nope, he was in Brussels when his wife died. To add insult to injury, when Philip wrote about Mary's demise, he simply said that he felt a reasonable regret over the whole thing. Once Mary passed, her widower Philip did what we all expected. Barely a moment after Mary's funeral mass ended, he proposed to Elizabeth. Perhaps, seeing how Philip had treated her half-sister, Elizabeth wisely rejected his advances. When Elizabeth did take the throne, she returned Protestant rule to England. With this shift, the court quickly framed Mary as a Catholic tyrant. But as we've seen, the real story is much more complicated. Not only was Mary's Catholicism quite popular, she was actually far less vindictive than her father. Henry executed somewhere between 57,000 to 72,000 people during his reign, including not one, but two of his own wives. Despite this, no one calls him Bloody Henry. Even though Mary was rather zealous when it came to persecuting Protestants in England, it still can't be said that she was more bloody than her father, Henry VIII. To this day, Queen Mary is associated with a dark urban legend. Bloody Mary. The story goes that if you turn off the lights, look at your reflection and chant Bloody Mary 3 times, you'll see a woman covered in blood, screaming about how you've stolen or hurt her baby. The truth is, Mary's life was a complex tapestry of tragedy, betrayal, and political maneuvering. While her zealous persecution of Protestants earned her the nickname Bloody Mary, it's essential to recognize that her reign was not marked solely by bloodshed. Mary's legacy reflects the complicated interplay of religion, power, and personal tragedy in the turbulent landscape of Tudor England. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe for more fascinating content.